Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into what has to be one of the most bizarre, yet absolutely massive geopolitical conflicts in modern history. And you know what's truly wild about it? This whole thing started without a single tank rolling across a border, and without a single missile being fired. We're going to explore how a completely standard border situation was deliberately hijacked and turned into a literal weapon of statecraft, totally transforming the eastern edge of Europe into a heavily fortified frontier.
Just think about the sheer asymmetry of this new kind of conflict for a second. On one hand, you have a cheap, everyday tourist visa and a standard charter flight. On the other hand, a $2.5 billion military response. Our source material details how Russia and Belarus basically figured out they could trigger the most expensive border militarization in modern European history just by manipulating human movement. They realized, hey, the absolute cheapest way to strike at an adversary isn't with multi-million-dollar hardware, it's with carefully orchestrated logistics.
1,200%. That is the massive, virtually vertical spike in border crossing attempts at the Polish frontier in October of 2021, compared to the monthly average of the year before. I mean, we're not talking about some gradual, seasonal shift in migration here. No, this was a sudden, highly calculated surge that plunged Poland's eastern border into absolute chaos, practically overnight.
Section 1. The weaponization of migration. So why did this massive spike happen right then? Well, we have to look at Europe's political fragility back in late 2021. Migration had become this deeply sensitive political earthquake. Previous waves of migration had, frankly, severely strained social fabrics, fractured coalitions, and even reshaped governments all across the European Union. Europe was politically raw, and autocrats in Minsk and Moscow, they knew that just one more sudden shock could send the entire bloc into political warfare.
The whole mindset is perfectly captured by this incredibly dark, calculated question from our source material: what could it do if you treated human beings the same way that you treated artillery shells? The planners in Belarus and Russia essentially hypothesized that if they just removed the randomness of migration, if they replaced independent smugglers with state-run pipelines operating on strict military timelines, they could use desperate people as a slow-moving battering ram right against NATO's eastern edge.
And this hybrid warfare business model, it operated as a precise step-by-step logistical pipeline. Step 1, Belarus dropped its security screenings and simplified visas for travelers coming from the Middle East and Africa. That immediately triggered a 250% jump in charter flights. Step 2, state-linked buses were literally waiting right at the Minsk airport to drive the new arrivals directly toward the border. And get this profit margin. Migrants were paying anywhere between 3,500 and 7,000 euros for this service. Finally, Step 3, Belarusian uniformed guards physically escorted these groups right to the absolute weakest points of the Polish border.
Section 2. Poland builds a wall. By October 2021, that border was completely unrecognizable. Polish border guards were suddenly dealing with over 17,000 crossing attempts in a single month. The source reports detail these crowds of hundreds of people being physically pushed across the line by Belarusian personnel. And these guards were actually observed cutting razor wire, clearing out vegetation, handing out ladders, and even giving out makeshift weapons and bolt cutters to help force a breach.
As things escalated, a really profound split emerged in how the international community responded. On one side, organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and the UN cited severe humanitarian concerns. They strongly condemned migrant pushbacks and pointed to the tragic freezing deaths of people trapped in the forests. But on the flip side, Western intelligence, the U.S. State Department, and NATO explicitly backed Poland's stance. They labeled the Belarusian actions a deliberate hybrid attack and a clear strategy of weaponized migration.
Faced with all of this continuous pressure, Poland made the call to build. Funding was approved in late October 2021, and crews worked around the clock right through an absolutely bitter winter. By June 2022, they had completed 186 kilometers of permanent 5.5-meter-tall steel barriers. To put that engineering feat into perspective, that is almost 1 meter of solid steel wall constructed every single minute, for 6 straight months. It's just staggering.
But, the steel was really just the skeleton. Polish authorities layered that wall with a complex, high-tech nervous system. We're talking 1,850 thermal and high-resolution cameras. They installed ground-penetrating radar and seismic grids that could detect tunneling within a 15-meter radius. All of this data fed directly into a central command system, which actually cut the border guards' response time down to just 4 minutes. And initially, it absolutely worked. Crossing attempts cratered by nearly 2/3 in 2022.
Section 3. Escalation and tragedy. Now, the operators of this pipeline, they didn't just give up. They simply adapted. Moving into 2023 and 2024, the tactics totally shifted. Smugglers and Belarusian intermediaries started using hand-dug tunnels. In fact, one tunnel saw 180 people pass through before it was finally detected. They brought in custom-cut bolt cutters, they shifted to river crossings, and the fees they charged actually doubled as the whole operation scaled up. The attack hadn't stopped at all, it just changed its shape.
I want to slow down for a second here because our sources highlight this next event as a profoundly tragic turning point. On May 28, 2024, Mateusz Sajtek, a 21-year-old private in the Polish army, was on duty when a group tried to force their way across. He was fatally stabbed through the bars of the border fence with a makeshift spear, and he tragically passed away 9 days later. Reports mark this as a really grim milestone. He was the first NATO soldier killed as a direct result of Russian hybrid operations in Europe since the end of the Cold War.
The fallout from that tragedy was immediate, and it was severe. 1,300. That number represents the massive explosion of weapons use incidents by Polish forces on the border in 2024. Just 1 year prior, that number was only 320. Following the young soldier's death, the Polish government drastically loosened firearms restrictions for its border guards, and public polling actually showed that 85.7% of the Polish public supported the use of weapons to defend the border. The rules of engagement had fundamentally completely hardened.
And here is where the true origins of the crisis became crystal clear. Prime Minister Donald Tusk revealed a pretty stunning piece of intelligence. 90% of the migrants arriving at the Polish border were actually carrying Russian visas, not Belarusian ones. This basically confirmed exactly what intelligence agencies had been suspecting all along. This wasn't just some regional autocrat acting alone in Minsk. No, this was a Moscow-directed Kremlin operation.
Section 4. The Eastern Shield. Knowing that this was a direct strategy coming right from Moscow, Poland decided that basic defense just wasn't going to cut it anymore. They shifted gears from standard border control to heavy military-grade fortification, launching a massive retaliatory program known as the Eastern Shield.
Honestly, the Eastern Shield reads exactly like a Cold War-style wish list of military hardware. We are talking about modular anti-tank obstacles, hardened bunkers, counter-drone capabilities, and AI-powered surveillance grids stretching across more than 700 kilometers of the Belarus and Kaliningrad frontiers. All told, this is a $2.55 billion investment explicitly designed to slow down armored advances and totally lock down that eastern flank.
In tandem with all this new hardware, Poland took some highly unprecedented legal steps in 2025. They announced they were withdrawing from the Ottawa Anti-Personnel Landmine Convention, and most controversially, they formally suspended the right to apply for asylum at the Belarusian border. Now, this drew severe condemnation from the UN and human rights bodies, who argued it was a violation of international law, but the Polish government pushed back, arguing that these laws simply weren't designed to handle state-sponsored weaponized migration. Following that suspension, border crossing attempts actually dropped by a massive 48%.
This incredibly aggressive defensive posture propelled Poland straight to the very top of NATO spending charts. Their defense budget surged to 4.7% of their GDP, completely dwarfing the NATO average. They are now pouring an astonishing 187 billion zloty annually into their military, making them the most heavily fortified frontline state in all of Europe. Every single concrete obstacle and thermal camera is a direct response to the pressure that was tested against them.
Section 5. The New Reality of War. The sources reveal that the pressure didn't just stay on the ground. In September 2025, the conflict escalated right up into the sky. Up to 23 Russian military drones violated Polish airspace over a tense 7-hour period. NATO and Polish jets scrambled immediately. And for the very first time in the entire history of the alliance, NATO fighter jets fired live shots to engage enemy aircraft over a member state's territory. Poland's reaction to this was incredibly swift. They closed their airspace, deployed 40,000 troops to the border, and formally invoked NATO's Article 4 for emergency consultations. Then, in December 2025, they announced an additional €2 billion investment into a fully integrated anti-drone defense wall. So, combined with the Eastern Shield, Poland has now committed roughly €4.5 billion just to defending this one frontier.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? The chilling reality, highlighted by defense analysts, is that the 2021 attack on Poland was really just a working prototype. It proved, beyond a doubt, that engineered migration is an incredibly cheap and highly effective weapon. And the playbook is already spreading. Finland was forced to close its Russian border in 2023. Latvia faced over 8,700 engineered crossing attempts in 2024. Lithuania is frantically adding concrete and wire. This is simply the new normal of European security.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question to think about. What happens to the next European country that Russia targets with this exact same playbook? Will the next targeted nation react by pouring billions of euros into steel and concrete, just like Poland did, completely rewriting their legal and military frameworks to survive? Or will their political systems fracture and just crack under the pressure? It's a reality the continent is facing right now. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the world around you.